PFAS, forever chemicals tied to cancer, birth defects. Written by Stacy Malkin. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, are a group of thousands of manufactured chemicals widely used by a range of industries and commonly found in a large number of consumer products. One common characteristic of PFAS is that they persist in the environment and can accumulate in humans and animals. For this reason, they are often referred to as forever chemicals. Some PFAS have been linked to cancer, birth defects, liver disease, thyroid disease, decreased immunity, hormone disruption, and a range of other serious health problems. Most people in the United States have been exposed to some PFAS, according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. The chemicals have been documented in the blood of people and animals around the world and have been found to be pervasive in the environment, particularly in areas where manufacturers or other industrial users are actively handling PFAS. In response to a Freedom of Information Act request, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in 2021 released a spreadsheet of more than 120,000 facilities around the U.S. that may be handling PFAS. Download that spreadsheet here. Researchers have identified the following routes of exposure to PFAS. Drinking water, in public drinking water or tap water systems, and private drinking water wells. Soil and water at or near waste sites, at landfills, disposal sites, and hazardous waste sites. Firefighting foam, used in training and emergency response events at airports, shipyards, military bases, firefighting training facilities, chemical plants, and refineries. Manufacturing or chemical production facilities that produce or use PFAS, oil and gas drilling sites, chrome plating, electronics, and certain textile and paper manufacturers. Food, fish caught from water contaminated by PFAS and dairy products from livestock exposed to PFAS, and other foods. Food packaging, grease-resistant paper, fast food containers, flash wrappers, microwave popcorn bags, pizza boxes, and candy wrappers. Household products, stain and water repellent used on carpets, upholstery, clothing, and other fabrics. Cleaning products, non-stick cookware, paints, varnishes, and sealants. Personal care products, shampoos, dental floss, and cosmetics. Pesticides, via active ingredients and their degradates, and PFAS leaching from fluorinated containers into pesticides. PFAS chemicals are hard to avoid, but experts say there are ways to reduce exposure. For tips, see this Washington Post article, How Can I Avoid Eating Food with Forever Chemicals? Company's new PFAS was highly toxic. Though PFAS have been commercially produced since the 1940s, their toxicity was not publicly established until the late 1990s. By then, manufacturers had already known for decades that PFAS are toxic and ubiquitous. In a May 2024 article for The New Yorker and ProPublica, Sharon Lerner reports that 3 million scientists discovered PFOS was present in human blood as early as the 1970s. They also had evidence from animal studies that PFOS was highly toxic, yet they continued to produce millions of pounds of the compound every year. How 3 million discovered, then concealed, the dangers of forever chemicals. The company found its own toxic compounds in human blood and kept selling them. By Sharon Lerner, The New Yorker, 5.2024. 9 takeaways from our investigation into 3 million's forever chemicals. What you need to know about the inside story of how the company allowed PFOS to seep into all of us while sitting on research that showed the chemical is toxic. ProPublica, a 2023 review paper in the Annals of Global Health, based on previously secret industry documents archived at the UCSF Chemical Industry Documents Library, examines strategies of corporate manipulation of science used by manufacturers of PFAS. The review shows that companies knew that PFAS was highly toxic when inhaled and moderately toxic when ingested by 1970, 40 years before the public health community. The research establishes that the industry used several strategies that have been shown common to tobacco, pharmaceutical, and other industries to influence science and regulation. Most notably, suppressing unfavorable research and distorting public discourse. See CBC article, Industry knew about risks of PFAS, forever chemicals, for decades before push to restrict them. Long history of warnings about health risks of PFAS. Environmental and human health experts and advocates have long been critical of the EPA for a lack of research into and regulation of PFAS. Researchers, lawyers, and environmental and human health advocates have warned about the dangers of PFAS for roughly 20 years, and evidence has come to light showing that companies involved in manufacturing PFAS have known even longer about dangers to human health. Research has demonstrated that two types of PFAS, perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonate, PFOS, are very harmful to humans and animals. In 2016, the National Toxicology Program, NTP, concluded that PFOA and PFOS were a specific hazard to immune system function in humans. U.S. manufacturers have been replacing those types of PFAS with other types, though concerns persist about the replacements. On November 16, 2021, the EPA said it was sending 4 draft documents to its Scientific Advisory Board that contain new data and analysis. The new information indicates that negative health effects may occur at much lower levels of exposure to PFOA and PFOS than previously understood, and that PFOA is a likely carcinogen, according to the EPA. PFOA, also known as C8, was a key ingredient in non-stick Teflon products. C8 was originally manufactured by 3 million and then by DuPont until the health hazards of the chemical were made public through a class action lawsuit. A replacement chemical called Gen X was introduced by DuPont in 2009 as a safer alternative to PFOA. But an investigation by The Intercept found that DuPont filed 16 reports with the EPA citing numerous harmful health effects of the chemical on animals, sparking concerns about the safety of the substitute. A C8 science panel was formed as part of the settlement of a class action lawsuit approved in February 2005 by West Virginia Circuit Court. That case involved allegations that human health problems were caused by releases of C8 from a DuPont facility in West Virginia. The science panel was charged with conducting a community study to help evaluate potential links between C8 exposure and any human disease. The research findings are detailed here. The litigation and settlement were largely the work of U.S. lawyer Robert Bilott. Bilott has spent the last 2 decades advocating for strict PFAS regulation and corporate accountability for PFAS pollution. His investigation into PFAS, including the corporate efforts to cover up harm, has been documented in a book, a feature film, and a documentary film, among other works. EPA Roadmap to Restrict PFAS. In April 2024, the Biden-Harris administration issued the first ever national, legally enforceable drinking water standard to protect communities from exposure to harmful PFAS chemicals, and $1 billion in funding to address PFAS in drinking water. According to the press release, exposure to PFAS has been linked to deadly cancers, impacts to the liver and heart, and immune and developmental damage to infants and children. The final rule will reduce PFAS exposure for approximately 100 million people, prevent thousands of deaths, and reduce tens of thousands of serious illnesses. The final rule announced in April represents the most significant step to protect public health under EPA's PFAS strategic roadmap and complements President Biden's government-wide action plan to combat PFAS pollution, the administration said. Highlights of the EPA's strategic roadmap, released in October 2021, include aggressive timelines to set enforceable drinking water limits under the Safe Drinking Water Act to ensure water is safe to drink in every community. Timelines for actions involved in the establishment of effluent guideline limitations for 9 industrial categories. Establishment of a hazardous substance designation under the federal Superfund law that enhances the government's ability to hold PFAS polluters financially accountable. A review of past actions on PFAS taken under the Toxic Substances Control Act, TSCA, to address those that are insufficient. Increased monitoring, data collection, and research so that the agency can identify what actions are needed and when to take them. A final toxicity assessment for a type of PFAS called Gen X used in manufacturing nonstick coatings that has been found in drinking water, rainwater, and air samples. Continued efforts to address PFAS emissions into the air. The EPA has also been pursuing research into PFAS destruction technology and other possible mitigation measures amid mounting evidence of the pervasiveness of the PFAS compounds. WHO scraps weak drinking water guidelines. Under pressure from independent scientists, the World Health Organization is pulling its drinking water standards for 2 PFAS chemicals and will go back to the drawing board, The Guardian reported in August 2024. WHO is conducting an entirely new review of scientific literature and disbanded the panel of scientists who developed the draft guidelines. It established a new panel with fewer industry-linked scientists and more regulatory officials, moves that have not happened in other revisions, said Betsy Sutherland, a former EPA manager in the agency's water division, reported Tom Perkins. This is unprecedented, but the WHO got unprecedented criticism, Sutherland said. Independent scientists charged that the WHO drinking water standards for PFAS were too weak, ignored credible research, did not fully protect human health, and were far above limits set by regulators in the US and EU. States moved to restrict PFAS. As of 2023, more than 100 laws had been enacted in 24 states to ban or restrict the use of PFAS chemicals used for waterproof, stain repellent, nonstick, or fire-resistant properties in a wide array of everyday household products. See Washington Post article, States Take Matters into Their Own Hands to Ban Forever Chemicals, 6.523. For updated lists of state policies on PFAS, see Safer States PFAS Policy Tracker / Statements on PFAS. Zurich Statement on Future Actions on Per and Polyfluoroalkyl Substances, PFAS, Environmental Health Perspectives, August 2018. Comment on fluorotechnology is critical to modern life. The Fluoro Council Counterpoint to the Madrid Statement, Environmental Health Perspectives, July 2015. The Madrid Statement on Poly and Perfluoroalkyl Substances, PFAS, Environmental Health Perspectives, May 2015. Helsingør Statement on Poly and Perfluorinated Alkyl Substances, PFAS, Chemisphere, November 2014. Research. Bone growth and development. Prenatal and early postnatal exposure to perfluoroalkyl substances and bone mineral content and density in the ODENS child cohort. Environment International, November 2023. Birth defects. Perfluoroctanoid exposure and major birth defects. Reproductive toxicology, August 2014. Cancer. Associations between per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, and county-level cancer incidence between 2016 and 2021 and incident cancer burden attributable to PFAS in drinking water in the United States, Nature, January 2025. First of its kind ecological study, led by researchers at the University of Southern California's Keck School of Medicine, finds that the risk of developing certain cancers may be higher for people exposed to PFAS in U.S. drinking water. PFAS in drinking water linked to increased cancer risk, groundbreaking study finds, by Pamela Ferdinand, U.S. Right to Know, 3.2025. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substance exposure combined with high-fat diet supports prostate cancer progression, nutrients, September 2021. Perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, exposures and incident cancers among adults living near a chemical plant, Environmental Health Perspectives, November 2013. Perfluorooctanoic acid exposure and cancer outcomes in a contaminated community. A geographic analysis, Environmental Health Perspectives, March 2013. Child growth and development. PFAS exposure is associated with an unfavorable metabolic profile in infants 6 months of age, Environment International, November 2024. Maternal serum PFAS levels were negatively associated with infant birth size and positively associated with percentile weight gained to 6 months. Birth outcomes in relation to prenatal exposure to per and polyfluoroalkyl substances and stress in the environmental influences on child health outcomes. ECHO Program, Environmental Health Perspectives, March 2023. Metabolic signatures of youth exposure to mixtures of per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. A multi-cohort study, Environmental Health Perspectives, February 2023. Cholesterol. Model PFOA exposure in coronary artery disease, hypertension, and high cholesterol in community and worker cohorts. Environmental Health Perspectives, December 2014. Associations between PFOA, PFOS, and changes in the expression of genes involved in cholesterol metabolism in humans. Environment International, July 2013. Diabetes. Exposure to per and polyfluoroalkyl substances in association to later occurrence of type 2 diabetes and metabolic pathway dysregulation in a multi-ethnic U.S. population. The Lancet eBiomedicine, July 21, 2025. Study links forever chemicals to increase in type 2 diabetes, Mount Sinai Hospital, July 21, 2025. Incidence of type I diabetes in a cohort with substantial exposure to perfluorooctanoic acid, Environmental Research, January 2014. Hormones. Perfluoroalkyl substances, sex hormones, and insulin-like growth factor 1 at 6 to 9 years of age. A cross-sectional analysis within the C8 Health Project, Environmental Health Perspectives, August 2016. PFOA and PFOS are associated with reduced expression of the parathyroid hormone 2 receptor, PTH2 gene in women, Chemisphere, February 2015. Hyperactivity. Serum perfluorinated compound concentration and attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder in children 5 to 18 years of age, Environmental Health Perspectives, October 2011. Immune function. Common infections in children aged 6 months to 7 years after high prenatal exposure to perfluoroalkyl substances from contaminated drinking water in Ronneby, Sweden. Environmental Research, March 2025. Forever chemicals, PFAS, may weaken immune function in children, leading to more frequent infections by Pamela Ferdinand, U.S. Right to Know, 1.2425. Mixtures of PFAS reduce the in vitro activation of human T cells and basophil, Chemisphere, September 2023. See also press release from the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research and coverage in Yahoo News. Inflammatory bowel disease. Inflammatory bowel disease and biomarkers of gut inflammation and permeability in a community with high exposure to perfluoroalkyl substances through drinking water, Environmental Research, November 2019. Kidney function. Perfluorooctanoic acid in chronic kidney disease. Longitudinal analysis of a Mid-Ohio Valley community, Environmental Research, April 2016. Exposure to perfluoroalkyl acids and markers of kidney function among children and adolescents living near a chemical plant, Environmental Health Perspectives, May 2013. Liver function. Modeled perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA. Exposure in liver function in a Mid-Ohio Valley community, Environmental Health Perspectives, August 2016. Neuropsychological outcomes. Perfluorooctanoate and neuropsychological outcomes in children, Epidemiology, July 2013. Neurotoxicity. Neurotoxicity of per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Evidence and future directions. Science of the Total Environment, October 2024. A growing body of research associated PFAS exposure with BBB disruption, calcium dysregulation, neurotransmitter alterations, neuroinflammation, oxidative stress, and mitochondrial dysfunction, all contributing to neuronal impairment. Image. Science of the Total Environment. Obesity. Prenatal exposure to per and polyfluoroalkyl substances and sex-specific associations with offspring adiposity at 10 years of age. Metabolic perturbation plays a role. Environment International, October 2024. Associations of prenatal per and polyfluoroalkyl substance, PFAS, exposures with offspring adiposity and body composition at 16 to 20 years of age. Project Viva, Environmental Health Perspectives, December 2023. In utero exposure to perfluoroalkyl substances and early childhood BMI trajectories. A mediation analysis with neonatal metabolic profiles, Science of the Total Environment, April 2023. Early life perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, exposure and overweight and obesity risk in adulthood in a community with elevated exposure, environmental research, July 2014. Pregnancy. Impact of exposure uncertainty on the association between perfluorooctanoate and preeclampsia in the C8 Health Project population, Environmental Health Perspectives, January 2016. Perfluorooctanoic acid exposure and pregnancy outcome in a highly exposed community, Epidemiology, May 2012. Relationship of perfluorooctanoic acid exposure to pregnancy outcome based on birth records in the Mid-Ohio Valley, Environmental Health Perspectives, March 2012. Serum perfluorooctanoic acid and perfluorooctane sulfonate concentrations in relation to birth outcomes in the Mid-Ohio Valley, 2005 to 2010, Environmental Health Perspectives, October 2013. PFOA and PFOS serum levels and miscarriage risk, Epidemiology, July 2014. Puberty. Association of perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonate, PFOS, with age of puberty among children living near a chemical plant, Environment Science and Technology, October 2011. Reproductive impacts/sperm. Maternal exposure to per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, and male reproductive function in young adulthood, combined exposure to 7-PFAS, Environmental Health Perspectives, October 2022. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances exposure is associated with polycystic ovary syndrome risk among women attending a fertility clinic, Science of the Total Environment, August 2024. Thyroid. Metabolic signatures of youth exposure to mixtures of per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. A multi-cohort study, Environmental Health Perspectives, February 2023. High exposure to perfluorinated compounds in drinking water and thyroid disease. A cohort study from Ronneby, Sweden, Environmental Research, September 2019. Exposure to perfluoroalkyl substances and thyroid function in pregnant women and children. A systematic review of epidemiologic studies, Environment International, February 2017. Perfluorooctanoic acid exposure and thyroid disease in community and worker cohorts, Epidemiology, March 2014. Thyroid function and perfluoroalkyl acids in children living near a chemical plant, Environmental Health Perspectives, March 2012. Ulcerative colitis. PFOA and ulcerative colitis, Environmental Research, May 2018. Ulcerative colitis and perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, in a highly exposed population of community residents and workers in the Mid-Ohio Valley Environmental Health Perspectives, August 2013. Exposure water contamination issues, general. Forever pesticides. A growing source of PFAS contamination in the environment, Environmental Health Perspectives, July 2024. PFAS widely added to U.S. pesticides despite EPA denial, study finds. The Guardian. Toxic forever chemicals found in pesticides used on food, in homes, and on pets. Study finds. CNN Health. Estimated transfer of perfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, from maternal serum to breast milk in women highly exposed from contaminated drinking water. A study in the Ronneby mother-child cohort, Science of the Total Environment, May 2023. PFAS chemicals were detected in every umbilical cord blood sample across 40 studies conducted over the last 5 years, according to a review of scientific literature conducted by the Environmental Working Group. November 2022. Forever chemicals detected in all umbilical cord blood in 40 studies. The Guardian. Revisiting pesticide pollution. The case of fluorinated pesticides, environmental pollution, January 2022. Evaluation and management strategies for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, in drinking water aquifers. Perspectives from Impacted U.S. Northeast Communities Environmental Health Perspectives, June 2018. Half-lives of PFOS, PFX and PFOA after end of exposure to contaminated drinking water, Occupational and Environmental Medicine, November 2017. Technical report, half-lives of PFOS, PFX and PFOA after end of exposure to contaminated drinking water, the Sahlgrenska Academy Institute of Medicine, University of Gothenburg, 2017. A cohort incidence study of workers exposed to perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, Occupational Environmental Medicine, May 2015. Associations between serum perfluoroalkyl acids and line 1 DNA methylation, Environment International, February 2014. Cohort mortality study of workers exposed to perfluorooctanoic acid, American Journal of Epidemiology, November 2012. Environmental fate and transport modeling for perfluorooctanoic acid emitted from the Washington Works facility in West Virginia, Environment Science and Technology, January 2011. Private drinking water wells as a source of exposure to PFOA in communities surrounding a fluoropolymer production facility, Environmental Health Perspectives, January 2011. Biomarker-based calibration of retrospective exposure predictions of perfluorooctanoic acid, Environmental Science and Technology, May 2014. Accumulation and clearance of PFOA in current and former residents of an exposed community, Environmental Health Perspectives, January 2011. Epidemiologic evidence on the health effects of perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, Environmental Health Perspectives, August 2010. The C8 Health Project, Design, Methods, and Participants, Environmental Health Perspectives, December 2009. News and opinion. Drinking water contaminated with forever chemicals may be tied to increased cancer risks, by Pamela Ferdinand, U.S. Right to Know, January 10, 2025. Prenatal PFAS exposure may be linked to childhood obesity, study shows, by Pamela Ferdinand, U.S. Right to Know, October 7, 2024. Child growth and development hampered by PFAS in blood, study says, by Sandy Lamotte, CNN, March 20, 2023. Pesticides are spreading toxic forever chemicals, scientists warn. Common chemicals sprayed on many crops each year are cloaked in bureaucratic uncertainties, by Meg Wilcox, Scientific American, June 15, 2022. And now researchers are warning of yet another and so far under-recognized source of these troubling toxins, common pesticides. EPA warns toxic forever chemicals more dangerous than once thought. The guidance may spur water utilities to tackle PFAS, but health advocates are still waiting for mandatory standards, by Diana Grandoni, Washington Post, June 15, 2022. 2 forever chemicals more toxic than previously thought. EPA drafts, by Rachel Frazen, The Hill, November 16, 2021. North Carolina AG sues 14 companies over fire suppressant, Associated Press, November 5, 2021. Attorney General Josh Stein filed 4 lawsuits which named 3 million, Corteva, and DuPont, among others. In the lawsuit, Stein is asking the court to require the manufacturers to pay for investigations to determine the extent of the damage, clean up the damage, replace water treatment systems and wells, restore damaged natural resources, and to monitor water quality. Senator Clean Water Advocates ask for state action after troubling Gen X toxicity report, by Johanna Still, Port City Daily, October 31, 2021. Chemours trademark unregulated chemical Gen X is more toxic than previously understood, according to a final toxicity report released by the Environmental Protection Agency Monday. The EPA's new lifetime chronic reference dose for Gen X, calculated with the most vulnerable populations in mind, is 3 parts per trillion, PEPT. Concentrations of the chemical ingested over a lifetime at or below this threshold are unlikely to lead to negative health effects in humans, the report concludes. Forever chemicals widespread in Massachusetts surface and groundwater, says new report by Barbara Morin, WBUR, October 29, 2021. The new analysis of state data follows reports of PFAS contamination in Cape Cod ponds and many Massachusetts rivers, pointing to widespread contamination throughout state lakes, ponds, rivers, and aquifers used as sources for drinking water. EPA finds chemical contaminating NC River more toxic than previously assessed by Rachel Frazen, The Hill, October 25, 2021. Lethal forever chemical taint our food, water, and even blood. The EPA is stalling by David Bond, The Guardian, October 24, 2021. There is no longer any population or place on Earth untouched by PFAS contamination. We are living through a toxic experiment with no control group. How chemical companies avoid paying for pollution by David Gels and Emily Steele, The New York Times, October 20th, 2021. To avoid responsibility for what many experts believe is a public health crisis, leading chemical companies like Chemours, DuPont, and 3 Million have deployed a potent mix of tactics. They have used public charm offensives to persuade regulators and lawmakers to back off. They have engineered complex corporate transactions to shield themselves from legal liability, and they have rolled out a conveyor belt of scantily tested substitute chemicals that sometimes turn out to be just as dangerous as their predecessors. Bad Chemistry series of articles by Sharon Lerner, The Intercept, September 2015. The U.S. has refused to regulate the chemicals in this class, known as PFAS, despite the fact that they persist indefinitely in the environment and have been linked to cancer and many other illnesses. EPA unveils new strategy to address U.S. contamination of forever chemicals by Carrie Gillam, The Guardian, October 18, 2021. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, on Monday announced a strategic roadmap it said would help restrict a class of toxic chemicals from being released into the environment and accelerate the cleanup of existing contamination of forever chemicals that are associated with a range of human health dangers. Revealed, more than 120,000 U.S. sites feared to handle harmful PFAS forever chemicals by Carrie Gillam, The Guardian, October 17, 2021. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, has identified more than 120,000 locations around the U.S. where people may be exposed to a class of toxic forever chemicals associated with various cancers and other health problems that is a frightening tally 4 times larger than previously reported, according to data obtained by The Guardian. These everyday toxins may be hurting pregnant women and their babies. PFAS industrial chemicals may disrupt pregnancy with lasting effects by Lisa Gross, New York Times, September 23, 2020. Suppressed study, The EPA Underestimated Dangers of Widespread Chemicals by Abram Lustgarten, ProPublica, June 20, 2018. A major environmental health study that had been suppressed by the Trump administration because of the public relations nightmare it might cause the Pentagon and other polluters has been quietly released online. The Lawyer Who Became DuPont's Worst Nightmare by Nathaniel Rich, The New York Times, January 6, 2016. Rob Bellot was a corporate defense attorney for 8 years. Then he took on an environmental suit that would upend his entire career and expose a brazen, decades-long history of chemical pollution. The Teflon Toxin, 3-part series of articles by Sharon Lerner, The Intercept, August 2015, exposes DuPont's multi-decade cover-up of the severe harms to health associated with a chemical known as PFOA, or C8, and associated compounds such as PFOS and GENX. The Teflon Toxin Goes to Court by Sharon Lerner, The Intercept, September 19, 2015. DuPont went to court this week defending its use of C8, the chemical that spread from the company's Parkersburg, West Virginia, plant into the drinking water of some 80,000 people in West Virginia and Ohio. A jury in Columbus, Ohio, is now hearing the case of Carla Bartlett, a 59-year-old woman who developed kidney cancer after drinking C8 contaminated water for more than a decade. Papers. DuPont Hid Chemical Risk Studies by John Halprin, Associated Press, November 16, 2005. DuPont Company hid studies showing the risks of a fluorine-related chemical used to line candy wrappers, pizza boxes, microwave popcorn bags, and hundreds of other food containers, according to internal company documents and a former employee. Other fact sheets and resources. PFAS contamination in the U.S. Interactive Map by Environmental Working Group, Interstate Technology and Regulatory Council, Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Great Lakes PFAS Policy Agenda, Center for the Advancement of Public Action, CAPA, at Bennington College. Books and film. Exposure, Poisoned Water, Corporate Greed, and One Lawyer's 20-Year Battle Against DuPont by Robert Batlott, Atria Books, July 14, 2020. The Devil We Know documentary film. Dark Waters feature film.